Hello, everybody. We're back again here. Lance Conley and I, we're doing another podcast. And this evening, we've got another guest here. We've got a guy named William Vincent, whose name you might be familiar with. He's been around the scene for a while. He's been done some podcasts of his own. I think he's done some conference speaking. He's very well known, familiar with the full preterist doctrine. And he's also happens to be Greek Orthodox. So my co-host here, Lance, is going to be very happy tonight. It's going to be a happy party. And I just wanted to say, thanks for coming on, William. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. Thank you guys for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to be here and be a part of everything.
That's great. Tell us something about yourself, William. I know you and I were friends. We're friends on Facebook, but I don't think we've really had too many interactions. I think just some comments back and forth. But tell us a little about yourself, how you got into this, and just a little something about your background.
As far as the full preterist thing, I started about 1992, moving toward full preterism. I think it was probably about 1994 or 5 before I actually kind of signed off on actually being a full preterist, and remained that way until probably about, I would say, 8 or 9 years ago. So pretty good bit of time in the full preterist camp. I was raised originally in a denomination called the United Pentecostal Church, which is a non-Trinitarian Pentecostal group. That's where I was kind of exposed to full preterism. But yeah, so kind of made a journey out into the wilds of the religious landscape. We can get into some of that if you'd like to at some point. There's a whole long story there, but yeah, so kind of did that for maybe a couple of decades, I guess, there, and
wow.
And then ended up finding my way back into Christianity through Orthodoxy, and then realizing the effects and the impacts that full preterism had on me. Went back to full preterist discussions, and kind of that's the lead up story to where we're at today.
Well, that's great. I don't know if we had any interactions. If you've been in the, if you were in the movement way back when, I don't know what forums did you hang out on when you were a full?
Yeah, it's kind of strange. The group that I encountered full preterism with was a kind of a group within the United Pentecostal Church denomination. So I didn't really encounter to a great degree people like Don Preston or William Bell, any of these guys to any great extent until I came back to the discussions. So I don't know that I was involved on that level back in those days, especially, and also back in the 90s, there wasn't a lot of, I think it was MySpace back in those days, so there wasn't a lot of social interaction going on at that level. But yeah.
Yeah, I remember years ago, there used to be a small group of Pentecostal full preterists, and they were pretty vocal. If I remember, we used to see them on Carm. I used to run into them on Matt Slick's forum quite a bit, and I never really got butted heads with any of them, and to where I could actually get into a detailed discussion and find out what they believed. But I remember they used to be out there, and they're not really too prominent anymore, are they?
No, and that's kind of the fruit of full preterism. Most of the people that I got into full preterism with are no longer even Christians anymore. I knew several pastor friends of mine. I was a pastor in the United Pentecostal Church, and had many friends, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I can't think of a single one out of maybe 5 to 10 people that are even still Christian. Most of them are no longer trying to be in any kind of they're not only are they not in any kind of ministry, they're not even some have become agnostic or atheist. Others are kind of this syncretism, spiritual but not religious kind of thing. But yeah, so most of the people that I encountered back in those days have in their mind evolved to the point they don't care about eschatology anymore. It's more new age kind of spirituality for them.
Right. So what got you out of full preterism, William?
Well, it's a good question, maybe a long answer. So full preterism was, for me, it made me kind of start questioning things. I was never really comfortable with any of it. I kept trying to make it work. But back in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, well, if what they're saying is true, it's also very possible that Jesus Christ was just a mistaken false prophet, and that none of his followers were right and happened to guess the destruction of Jerusalem correctly. And so I had that doubt, and it caused me to keep looking for more and more expanded circles of religion to try to make it all work. But at some point, at some point I kind of departed from mainstream Christianity. There was a time when Michael Miano, I don't know if he's still a thing anymore, but Miano was pretty heavy blasting full preterism at that time. And he actually had me come onto an interview for what I was calling esoteric preterism at the time, which is basically a marriage between New Age Gnosticism and full preterism. So that's kind of where I started there. The more I got into the Gnosticism, the more I got into the New Age, the less I was definable as a Christian. And I really studied a lot of different religions, started trying to incorporate a lot of that stuff in there, to the point where I didn't recognize what I was anymore. And I didn't believe, I had nothing to believe in. I had nothing to communicate to other people of what I believed. And I really became so discouraged to the point where there would be times I would just really be in tears because I just didn't know what the truth was anymore. And there was a moment when I, on a personal level, said, I just prayed. And this is what full preterism did to me. This is where I was at. I prayed. I said, God, I don't even know who you are or what you are anymore. I don't know even how to pray or if I should pray. But I don't want to be in rebellion to you. Whatever you are, please show me the truth, because I don't know what to do anymore. And from that point, little by little, I was led back to Christianity. And as I've said before, for me, that was through the path of the Orthodox Church became my connection to Christianity. But so I hope that makes sense, that really long path there. But yeah, kind of went out like the prodigal son there. I became
Right.
something that was unrecognizable, and then found my way back.
It makes sense to me because, I mean, as you know, William, like you and me went through pretty much the same thing, well, not the same, but pretty similar. Like, we both go through this faith crisis because of full preterism, like, because we're reading it and we're trying to be honest, and we're just like, okay, this seems like a failed doomsday cult. Like, what's the point,
Right.
And nobody's answering our questions. Nobody's, we're not able to find it. But lo and behold, we start reading like the church fathers. We start reading all these people that the full preterists tell us not to read because, oh, they're bad. They're Catholic. They're, ooh, ooga booga, and slowly and surely, when we kept reading that, we kept, studying the faith more, and those old time saints started to, show us that, hey, there's actually a solution to all this. And for us, it was the Eastern Orthodox Church. I'm not saying that everyone has to join it. I wish you would, but yeah, I mean, we both went through the faith crisis. We were both just being honest, and
When you say faith crisis, and I know you've said this before, Lance, and I guess I just want to be super clear about what you're talking about now, and you too, William. So when you guys went through a faith crisis, was that like doubting your faith, right? That's what that means, right?
yeah.
For me, it started. It was like a seed of doubt was placed in my mind, and I would say in my spirit. And the first question I asked myself was, if Christianity is mistaken, is belief in anything? In other words, are the atheists right? Is there a God? Is there anything to believe in? So I started there. I spent about 4 or 5 years investigating atheism and agnosticism, and I was trying to be very open to let them give me the knockout punch that they're writing. So I actually wrote a little book. It's probably not that great, but it's called The 10 Myths of Atheism, which was kind of the fruit of that research there. So, and maybe that makes sense in my journey too, because I just started with zero. I said, let's just start with the zero sum and see if we can work our way back up. So that's what kind of led me back into, okay, well, I think there's something there. So who's got it right? Is it the Christians, the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Muslims? Who's right? And you guys will find that I struggle with short answers. So I hope I
No, it's fine.
hope I answer that correctly.
That's a good answer.
Okay.
And, I kind of went through this. Well, I didn't go through a faith crisis or anything, but there was a short period of time where I was debating flat earthers. And they were coming out with some really good arguments. I'm talking about like biblical arguments, like, the four corners of the earth and stuff like that. And so I was starting to wonder, and I said, maybe the Bible writers did think that the earth was flat. And then, what happened was I thought of time zones. And I said, well, wait a minute now. I said, if the sun can't be, at this altitude above the horizon in Hawaii, and then at a totally different altitude in, say, Connecticut, and then another, be evening in Australia, there's got to be a curvature of the earth. So I started examining that, and I found, well, there are some passages that you could say teach a spherical earth. But anyways, I didn't have the experience that you guys had, but I could certainly see how it would lead somebody to have one of those major faith crises. In fact, we deal with people constantly that claim that, they're just trying to be objective and study these different scholars, and come to find out when you start examining which scholars it is that they're studying, it's like there are people that don't believe in, I don't know if they believe in God, but they don't believe in Jesus Christ. They don't believe he's the Son of God. They don't believe he's resurrected from the dead. They don't believe he's coming back. And it's like they're leaning toward the atheist scholar. So I guess the question I want to ask now, William, is, and you too, Lance, is do you feel there's anything, and I don't want to use a slippery slope argument or any kind of logical fallacy, but do you feel there's anything inherent in hyperpreterist theology that would lead or incline someone to take a more agnostic or atheist approach ultimately after they've run the gamut of the studies all the way out to their logical conclusions?
Yeah, if I could, the answer to that is absolutely yes, because the soil from which full preterism grows is agnostic 19th century German scholarship, skeptical scholarship. People like Albert Schweitzer, the historical Jesus seminars. This is not hypothetical. This is the very information where full preterists begin. For instance, that line they'll drop, Jesus was, a failed. Or people believe Jesus was a failed eschatological prophet. He predicted his coming within the first century. These statements are statements that come from the historical Jesus seminars, and it's a very skeptical, materialistic, rationalistic view that assumes that Christianity is by and large a mistaken or a response to a failed prophetic ministry of Christ. So yes, it is in part of the DNA of it. If you accept, so in other words, to become a full preterist, you have to accept as a premise things that were generated by skeptical, agnostic, and atheist scholars. So yes, it's inherent to the fruit of it. What Christ said in Matthew 7, you shall know them by the fruit. Look at the number of people who came to full preterism and who are now either agnostic or atheist. It's inherent in it. It creates a sense of doubt, and it leads people away from the resources of faith that keeps them connected to a faith community. We could get into that. I think there's a ethos to it of that radical individualism. I'm the only person that knows. My opinion above everyone else's. It's anti-community. It's anti-cohesiveness. So that's my long yes there. It is definitely in the DNA of full preterism to lead people away from, not just away from Christianity, but away from faith in anything at all.
Yeah, I think the same thing as William. And I'm not dissing Protestants when I say this, by the way, like for everyone watching, but I think there is a certain section of Protestantism that they protest so hard that they end up trying to reduce the faith into just almost nothingness. Like, they're just like, oh yeah, we're constantly reforming, we're constantly doing this, and it's like at some point it gets to the point where you don't have anything. And I think full preterists a lot of times fall into that category. Not all of them, but quite a bunch of them. Like the ones at least that we deal with, it's a very common thread of like that train of thought.
Yeah,
So
that's true. And that what you said, Lance, you made a really great point about that always reforming, with semper reformanda or whatever. It's like when they use that, a lot of times when people use that, what that means, what they're really saying is everybody else was wrong. Now we're starting from scratch again. It's like you're building a house and you lay the foundation and then you start laying the bricks, tier upon tier. But then somebody comes along and knocks it down every 20 years. You ain't never going to have a house. So it's really, yeah, you're right about that, because it's one thing to be always reforming and to always be purifying your faith and purging out the things that crept in afterwards that sort of, veered from the historical faith. It's quite another thing, however, to say that, nobody got it wrong, or every generation go through another crisis where now you've got to reevaluate everything. The purpose of having scholars and the purpose of having teachers and leaders and pastors and preachers is to edify the saints and to build something that's going to last. If it keeps getting knocked down, then you're in a situation like what you talked about, Lance, where you're defeating everything. You're defeating the foundations and you're defeating the superstructure. So I agree with you on that. We as Protestants have a lot of work to do in that department.
And the other problem is like when you're constantly doing that, that's why there's kind of a joke in the full preterist, like at least with the ex full preterists, we have kind of a joke, like Frost and William and all of us, we have this joke that the full preterist lifespan is like 5 years. Like they go for like 2 years, like, oh yeah, this is a great thing. And then finally, like after maybe the third year, they're starting to like think a little bit. They're like, wait, how does this apply to my life? And then after like the next 2 years, maybe it starts to go downward spiral where they're just like, okay, this doesn't make sense. I'm not getting answers from all the people that are kind of leading this movement, even though they're not saying they're the leaders of the movement. Then it's starting to turn into a problem. And then I've had so many people, and William has had this too, where they leave full preterism and like they've been viciously attacking us the whole time. And then they leave it and they're like, okay, I'm having a faith crisis and I need you to tell me, like, what do I do? Because you said that you were in a faith crisis. How can you help me get out of this? Because I feel like I'm dying right now. And I'm like, all right, man, like here, I'm going to give you what helped me. I'm going to have you read some church fathers. I'm going to pray with you if you will let me pray for you. Like, just try to, invest in them. And I've had a lot of people that, they start out going, Lance Conley's a real jerk. He's a real, loser, whatever. Then suddenly I'm not such a loser anymore. Suddenly it's like, oh man, actually he's like the nicest guy ever. Wow. And Williams had this happen like quite a lot too. Because we've had our ministry going together for a long time now. So
it feels like a rescue, it feels like a faith rescue mission. Like, yeah, and I think that's why I do it. I mean, that is exactly why I do it. It's not because I want to prove, the full preterist cabal wrong. It's because there are people out there who were like me, who were just had felt like they had no choice. They feel like they're trapped. And I think, and let me ask this question, Lance. I know what to call you. Other guy, what should how should I refer to you? I don't.
Yeah, you could call me Brian. I go by a handle because like I've told Lance before, it's kind of a standing joke between us. There's another guy out there named Brian Simmons who
Okay.
is basically, he's a false teacher. He translated the Bible, but he's teaching all kinds of stuff. So I don't like to get my name confused with him. But yeah, for purposes of conversation, you can always refer to me by Brian, by my
Okay.
my Christian name. Yeah.
Okay. Right. I didn't want to reveal like information that I had that was maybe top secret. So I feel good about it. So
No, you're good.
so Brian, but I think you helped me to articulate what it was about full preterism that led me on a faith crisis, because the thought process is if the historical Christian church, and I'll draw a big circle around that. I'll
Same.
Protestant, whatever, if historical Christians were able to get something this important, this wrong for this long, how do we just know that the whole thing's not wrong? That's what it cracks something in your belief system. And I think that's it. I mean, how could Christians get it this wrong so badly for so long? I think that's where it's that. And I'll throw Protestants a bone here with always reforming. I think it depends on what you mean by that, right? I think as Orthodox Christians, we hold ourselves accountable to what we feel like has been the historical faith, the historical view of Christianity. So, and there have been times we have ourselves as a community said, some people have got it wrong. So that's fine. Let's correct our course. That's fine. But I think there's another element that says, and I think you said this too, Brian, we need every generation. This element has every generation starting from zero all over. We're rebuilding it. And that makes absolutely no sense. How can you have a truth if the truth is never manifested in any kind of concrete way ever?
That's true. And this is why I've often said, to preterists, that what they're really doing is they're teaching some kind of an evolution, sort of like a Darwinism, where there's a process of, natural selection that goes on. You've got all these different faiths coming together and clashing, and then the bad ones get weeded out eventually. And so eventually you have this development of a truth, that sort of surfaces up from the wreckage of historic Christianity. And that's, to me, I want to ask you, William, and you too, Lance, is that the way the Eastern Orthodox theology works? What is do they have like I know they're developing certain things like probably the Roman Catholic Church is, but do they have an understanding like what we're talking about, where it's like an evolutionary view, or is it like, no, this is the faith, has been the same from day one, and it's going to continue to be the same until the second advent, until the day of judgment? What is your articulation of that?
Well, the answer to that is no. We have a totally different doctrine. The concept of the development of doctrine, the evolution of doctrine, is a doctrine of our good friends and loved people, the Roman Catholics. We would say that that the truth has always been the truth. Now, there's been times when it needed to be articulated in a more clear way to eliminate the possibility of heresy. So thus the Nicene Creed, thus the Chalcedonian Creed. But as far as the truth itself, that has always been, the Vincentinian canon, that which has been believed everywhere by all and at all times. So no, we definitely have a totally different view there. And so we wouldn't look for an evolution of views, like you said, where these are competing views, and then finally the best view gets to win the day. No, we believe that the apostles actually had the truth to begin with, but that over history the church had been, and it's almost similar. You look at somebody like Arius, and he comes along and he kind of weaves within the accepted boundaries of his day, and he teaches something that now seems absurd, that Christ was, a creature, not God himself. And so the church has to come together and refine the language and say it's no longer good enough just to say Son of God, because Arius says that. You need to say Son of God, and by that you need to mean that he is God of God, light of light, true God of true God. So the statements were refined to hold to the truth that had already been preached, rather than developing and creating new understandings and new revelations. And I would say that I grew up in the United Pentecostal Church, a group that also was heavily, the term is restorationist, and they leaned on that idea. The full preterists leaned on that idea, this idea that the truth has been lost or distorted and needs to somehow be reclaimed or reinvented or reformed. And I think that grows out of that concept of the evolution or the development of doctrine.
And I mean, we're going to talk about Gary Demar, but like, to me, that's why there's a big problem with like what Gary Demar is trying to do with full preterism, because like he's basically trying to say like, well, who cares about the creeds? Like, how about like we go and go with what the Bible says, right? And like, if I'm just pointing this out because I love Gary. He's a nice guy. I appreciate some of his stuff, but if he was in Eastern Orthodoxy, we would be like, what are you doing, bro? Because like the creed is not some like made up by man. Like, I mean, the men put it together, but the Holy Spirit guided us to make those creeds, like because of the scriptures, all of that. But like in Eastern Orthodoxy, we wouldn't even have this debate. We'd be like, Gary, what are you doing? Like, come on, the resurrection of the dead, really? Like, you're going against that? Like, the second coming is past? Come on, dude. Like, I mean, we wouldn't even have this.
Well, Lance, what we would do is if he said, he would say, well, I believe in the resurrection of the dead. I just believe it happened in 70 AD. What we would do is say, okay, let's check that against every other Christian that has written since 33 AD and see how that pans. Oh, yeah. Everybody except for you says differently. You're probably wrong. So that's kind of how we would approach that. Yeah.
Right.
And I think the same. I agree with that approach, that you have to go back. That's what I've been telling people for years. So you got to go back to the beginning. And I'm not, I don't really know the Eastern Orthodox position that well, but from I guess you could say from my intuition, from my instinct, spiritually, it would be to go back to the beginning and see what the original successors of the apostles taught, and then to build from there, rather than to try to build a house from the roof down, as say people like Gary Demar are doing. I know we've I think Lance perhaps can explain better exactly what it is Gary Demar is doing, because I haven't listened to all of his podcasts. I kind of get tired of him pontificating and bloviating and just trying to be a big shot. But Lance, what exactly is he doing? What is his end game? Do you know?
Well, I don't know if he's got an end game. Like, it seems to me that he's just trying to play both sides and make it out that full preterism is like, it's okay, it's acceptable. And like, it isn't. Like, it just isn't. We can't accept it. Like, it's not scriptural. It's not going to go with the traditions of the church, even for reform circles. Like, it's not going to go for that, because it's just not, I mean, it's not biblical. It's not traditional. It's not like, you have all these saints, like all these people that have come before Gary, and like, they all teach the same stuff. Like, the second coming is future. Resurrection of the dead is future. I mean, it's simple. This part should be really simple for us all. Like,
right. But Lance, they didn't have Jewish studies, and they didn't have first century studies. They didn't have lexicons. They didn't have all of these resources. So now these guys might tell you something like to this effect, that modern scholarship has brought all these resources to the front of the pile that will allow us to more clearly sort of see via hindsight, where we went wrong and now where we're going. What would be your response, you too, William? What would be
So
your response to someone who says, well, we've got all these resources now. We've dug up, Dead Sea Scrolls, and we've got, now we've got, better understanding of the historical texts and all that. What would be your response to an
so
argument?
I think they're useful, obviously. Like, I think a lot of the scholarship that's come out is like awesome. Like the stuff that's come out for Second Temple Judaism, oh my gosh, it's like been a like godsend for New Testament studies. Like it's great. But at the same time, like, at least for me, when I've been studying Second Temple literature stuff, like I've been using Father Stephen De Young, Michael Heiser, Protestant. Like I've been studying all this too. And actually the Second Temple stuff confirms what the church fathers have been saying. like you do get like Judaism going like, hey, these Christians believe that Jesus is the second power of heaven. We're gonna try to make that a heresy, right? Because we don't believe Jesus is God, and stuff like that. But it just keeps confirming what we believe, because Saint Justin Martyr, he's fighting the whole time with in his what's it called, the his apology, in his apology, where he's talking with a Jewish man. He's talking about the second power of heaven in there. Like he's debating this guy on the second power of heaven. He's like, Jesus is the second power. And the Jewish man is like, no, he's not. And they're debating this. And we get more context about this whole debate because we know now that Second Temple period, they were debating this. They were like, who is the second power? Does God have a body? They were debating stuff like this. And we have the answers to what the Christians accepted to be the case. Like, we know that. And for Gary to be like, well, there's some questions to be asked and answered. Well, I can't answer the question, but maybe this full preterist can do that. Like, no, like it's there. We already know that. We already have some of this stuff. Like, anyways, yeah.
I don't, and I would say, I think you're right, Lance. I think what we do have from scholarship, and let me say this, the church fathers in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth century, to say that they had less access to scholarship and documents and information than we do now is absolutely absurd. There's still documents from that era that have not been translated into English yet. These people knew Syriac, they knew Aramaic, they knew Greek, they spoke it as native languages, and they weren't guessing at what Jews of the era believed. They were dialoguing with Jews of the era, and so I don't think Demar and this modern group of full preterists, I don't think scholarship generally today necessarily has more information. Secondly, and moving, and this is not disparaging, I don't think people like Don Preston, William Bell, Gary Demar, I don't think they have even a basic, I don't think they have a scholarly knowledge of even Greek. So I don't think, and I will say this, and I'm not trying to, I know a good bit about Second Temple Judaism because that became a part of my studies, trying to find my way back to God. And what I know is what they're saying about what the Hebrew mindset, and it's totally not true. It's the opposite of the truth. They're more aligned in their thought processes with second and third century Gnostics than they are with Second Temple Judaism. But to go to that, no, the information that we have today is good. But how do I need to say? What I'm saying is the full preterism is not a fruit of more information that has come to light today. Full preterism, and I mean this specifically when I say this, is the fruit of not having the information, of guessing and thinking what it could be, and creating that, and then trying to reverse engineer that back over information that they read.
Yeah, it's putting it in a vacuum. I mean, it pretty much is like whatever they came in before them, they usually impose that onto what they want the text to say, and then they do this little paradigm, and then it's like a vacuum, and they try to fill it up with whatever concoction that they can come up with sometimes. Like, yeah. So
What do you feel, William, to be the strongest argument if you were to meet, say, encounter a full preterist right now, and you were to strike up a dialogue, and he were to, go hard, push hard against what you're preaching, against your faith? What would be this? And you only had 10 minutes. Okay. What would be the argument that you would use? The most strongest, most powerful argument, if you had any hopes of convincing him, which you probably, it's a hit or miss, of course, but you only had 10 minutes. What would be the strongest argument you could use against full preterism?
I think you have to go with full preterists. You have to go to Scripture itself, and I think you have to strike at the heart of their presumptions. And I think for me, that has become simply the fact that when the disciples in Matthew 24 or Luke 21, Mark 13, when Christ said to them, "You see all these things here, not one stone will be left upon another," that they said, "When will this be, and what is a sign of your coming in the end of the age or the end of the world?" And that Christ says to them, "Be careful that you're not deceived. There will be wars and rumors of wars. There will be earthquakes, but the end is not yet." And I think the presumption from full preterists, and they take this from dispensationalism, is that Christ launches from their question into an explanation of things that will lead up to the end. When Christ actually says to them, "The things I'm describing to you are not the end. These are things you'll have to endure. These are things you need to be patient through tribulation with, but this is not the end. And if you're looking for this to be the end, you are at risk of being deceived and having your faith overthrown." So I think that's where I would start. I think they've got the total opposite understanding of what Christ meant in the Olivet Discourse.
Right.
And that there's 2 days in Matthew 24 through 25. Like there's 2 days mentioned. Like it doesn't just mention the destruction of Jerusalem. It mentions like there's another day to come. And I'm talking about this day, and it's the final day. And full preterists try to lump it all into one thing, but you got to read it slowly. Like it like what William said, like it.
So our preterist friend, he's still here and he's still arguing with you, William. And he says, "Okay, I got 5 more minutes. I'm going to throw a verse at you." So he gives you Matthew chapter 24, verse 34. He says, "This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." So it had to happen in the first century. How would you respond to that? Because that's the argument we hear, I think, the most, is they try to compress everything into that one generation. What would be your response?
I think my personal response is that I think that phrase there particularly refers to what he had originally predicted. Okay. Christ did not originally predict the end of the world, the end of the age, the end of anything. He said, "This city will be destroyed." The disciples said, "When is the end of the age?" I personally believe that statement about these things refer to just the destruction of Jerusalem. I think that he's saying to them, this generation will not pass until this city's destroyed. Because I think he's already clarified to them that this destroying of the city is not the end. It's not even the purpose of the gospel. The gospel is going to be preached into all the world. So I think his phrase is limited. I don't think it's inclusive of everything he speaks about. And I think if we could work through that passage, especially in Matthew 24, Matthew's version, verse by verse, we could identify specifically things that would not be limited to that generation, even for full preterists, unless you're an Israel only full preterist. Like, for instance, the preaching of the gospel into all the world. Are they going to say that was limited to the first century, or does it expand beyond there? I think they would have to say that it does. So therefore, even they would have to admit that his statement about that generation was limited. I'm saying it's limited to just what he originally predicted, that Jerusalem would fall, because he follows that statement there by saying, "But about that day, no man knows." So why would he follow with that if he was just describing that day to them in great detail? So that would be my follow-up there. I feel like that he's saying this generation will not pass until the things I said, this city will be destroyed. That's going to happen. But about that day, the day you guys were asking about, nobody knows. And that parallels precisely with Acts 1, when he said, they asked him, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? He said, it's not given for you to know the times and the seasons that the Father has put in his own power. So I think yet again, they've made a mistake there. I think they're getting the opposite thing of what he's trying to say.
Right. And I'd also add, like, if they're asking that question, like that you asked, Matthew 24:34, like, okay, it's that generation. So which generation are you part of? And they'd have to argue from their premise, they'd have to argue, well, I guess I'm not part of that. Oops, audience relevance really messes them up on that part. So
what about the time text? Because that's another argument we hear a lot. And I don't know if the Eastern Orthodox scholars have actually, I don't know if they've ever written anything about, any refutations of preterism, but we hear a lot about those time texts, like soon at hand, behold, I come quickly. And they say, well, they're interpreting it from the strictly historical, standpoint, as if, the scriptures were only to be understood and interpreted as historical documents. How do you get around those interpretations? Someone says, well, look, it says right here, behold, I come quickly, so it can't be 2,000 years. What would be your response to that?
Well, I think that we should probably deal with the strongest secondary time text for them is probably Matthew 16, 27, 28. The Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with all the angels, and he shall judge every man according to his work. And there'll be some of you that stand here that shall not taste of death or see death until you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And say that, and this one's important because it does, the statement he makes there does limit what he's speaking about to the lifespan of those who hear him. This is extremely important because I don't even think Matthew 24:34 could be as strong as far as limiting the time. But this one definitely limits. Now, the question is, what is he talking about? And the historical view of the church has been that he was speaking about his transfiguration that was coming right away. And as a matter of fact, it's not just the historical view of the church. The Apostle Peter says that that's what it was.
Yep.
He says in his epistle that we heard it, we were there, and we seen him. We were eyewitnesses of his coming and the glory of his kingdom. Okay. So I will expand on that. Now that's fairly rock solid. I think you could very easily make a very strong scriptural case that what he's predicting there is that they were going to see the glory of his kingdom that was revealed to them and on the Mount of Transfiguration. I will add to that. I believe that there's a greater dimension of the glory that he will receive in the ascension as the glorified Son of Man. I think that's what he's predicting there. The glory of the kingdom is not the end of the age. It's not the general resurrection. It's not the end of time. It is the glorification of the Son of Man that's prophesied in Daniel 7, 13, and 14. That's what he's predicting there. And they did live to see that. And I think Sam, myself, others, Lance as well, have pointed out, this is about to happen. The Son of Man, and John, he said, the Son of Man is about to be glorified. This is not something that's going to happen 40 years later in 70 AD. This is something that he's about to go to Jerusalem. He's about to be crucified. And 3 days later, he will rise from the dead. And a Son of Man, a human person, will ascend to the throne of David and to the right hand of God. This is pretty huge, right? And so they need to know this. I think, and so a short answer there is he's predicting that. Now, I want to anticipate an argument that's usually reflected back to that is, well, it says he will judge every man according to his works. But I would challenge you to look for that phrase in the Psalms. And that is a phrase that is used of God as God sits on the throne and judges everybody according to the work. Similar, Paul says in Galatians, God is not mocked, whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And the phrase itself is God judging according to work, his work, every man according to the works, is used in Psalms of God. So that phrase is not speaking about Jesus coming at the end of time at this great white throne judgment. It's saying that in his position, in the glory of his Father, in the presence of the angels, he will set and act in the power and the authority of God. That's what that phrase means. He would judge as God judges, every man according to his work.
And I'd also add Psalms 110 because that's always used too, by the apostles like all the time. And it says, I'm going to just put some little bits here, but it says he will rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people shall be volunteers in the day of your power. In the beauties of holiness from the womb of the morning, you have the dew of your youth. The Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever. Oh, and it says a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. So to be a priest, you have to be a man and a male. And wait a second. There you go. God man. Huh. So that kicks out some of that idea that, God's not God or Jesus is blowing up his body or whatever the heck.
So what about the argument that we hear about, and I'm just going to skip to another Bible verse here about, and we've heard this before, Lance, and I'm not going to mention any names, but they keep bringing up the same Bible verse about Hebrews chapter 9, where it says in verse 28 says, so Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear a second time without sin unto salvation. And then of course they collate that with Hebrews chapter 10, where it says that for yet a little while, and he that shall come will come and will not tarry. Now they're saying, well, see, the second coming must have occurred just a few years after this epistle was written. How would you guys respond to that argument? Because we hear that a lot too.
Right. I would go to Romans 11 also, like, about that, because like it says that the Redeemer shall come from Zion and take away the sins of his people, right? So I mean, it's pretty much obvious that that's kind of also being referenced in Hebrews 9 also. So like, yeah, he's going to come back and he's going to remove sin from the universe. He's going to remove evil from the universe. And how has every Jew and every early Christian said that that's going to happen? It's going to be resolved by the resurrection of the dead, which, hey, it can't have, if it happened in 70 AD, then he clearly hasn't resolved evil. He clearly hasn't resolved sin, because we all still sin. We all still have evil in our lives. So, but I'll let William.
Well, and I think, and that's true. That's absolutely true. But I think this goes back to what they're missing on Second Temple Judaism. The writer of Hebrews here is not trying to predict the end of the world. He's trying to show that God in the Old Testament said that he would physically come to Israel. He that waiteth will come. And what the writer of Hebrews is trying, read what he's saying. That he's not trying to prove that Jesus is about to come to destroy Jerusalem in 70 AD. He's trying to show that the Old Testament said God would physically come. His son would fit, and through his son would physically come to Israel and visit them. That's what's been referenced there. I think that's pretty obvious if you work through the book of Hebrews. I think that's my answer there. I think that's what he's predicting there. I don't think he's predicting.
So if I were to insist on these time texts, the necessary inference would be, or maybe not even the necessary, but at least the more plausible inference would be that Jesus Christ he said he would return to Israel. He obviously never, removed sin from Israel or anything like that. But would the necessary or more plausible inference be that he was a failed apocalyptic prophet, or that this coming happened, the second coming actually did happen, but in a manner that was non-visible, that was non-experiential, that was kind of one of these Gnostic deals like we hear from the full preterists? What would be the more, was this going to lead you more towards, I guess, mythicism, atheism, agnosticism, or would this lead us more towards, I guess, full preterism?
Well, let me throw this out. If what full preterists assert about, say, the writer of Hebrews and these other texts is true, that Jesus predicted the end of the world, and if this were true, this would have been the perfect polemic for first and second century Judaism to say, well, he didn't do what he said he was going to do. He said he was going to come in judge the earth. Second Temple, first, second century Judaism and Christians knew that's not what this is. This is not what the debate's about. The debate is about whether this man that was able to heal people, do all this, if he was God physically come to Israel. This is not about it's not about the end of time. It's about, was he God? That's the question. And like I said, I think the evidence there is of all the polemical argument back and forth between the Jews and the Christians there. You don't hear anybody, not Jew or Christian, say anything about Jesus failing to predict the end of time. They knew better. This was not what he's talking about.
Right. Yeah, they knew the Hebraic mindset. So, I mean,
The real Hebraic mindset, right?
yeah, exactly.
Not the Don Preston mindset, not the Don Preston mindset.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Not that that's always the mindset, but yeah, like it's not the Hebraic mindset. Like the Hebraic mindset is that the physical body dies, the soul goes to be with God in some way, and it will be put back together because they're part of the divine council. The divine council of Adam was body and soul united as one. Body is earth, soul is heaven, and he was representing for all of humanity the divine council of God, and he ruined it, screwed up the fall that got split, and Christ is the second Adam. He is body and soul, earth and heaven, and puts it back together. And to put it back together, the resurrection of the dead has to happen, just like 1 Corinthians 15 talks about. So he has to put them back together. Otherwise, they're not a whole man. They're not a whole human. And they're not doing like God intended for the divine council or any of eschatology, honestly. But anyways.
So say I'm convinced. Mr. Hyperpreterist is convinced. He's starting to have doubts about hyperpreterism or full preterism, whatever you want to call it. And he says, okay, so what's left to be fulfilled? What are we looking for now? How would you answer them? Are we looking for a great tribulation? Are we looking for, several centuries more of what we have current churchly conditions? Are we looking for a man of sin? Are we looking for maybe Biden? I don't know, maybe somebody else out there somewhere that's going to rise up and persecute the saints. What are we looking for, William, and Lance as well?
I'll quote Jesus. It's not given for you to know the times of the season that the Father has put in his own power, but you will receive power to be witnesses in all the world. That's not our business, really. It's not the business of the church. It's the business of the church to be witnesses in all the world and be faithful unto the end. I think that's exactly what he told us to do when those apostles originally asked and said, when will this be? He said, don't worry about that. You be faithful to the end, and that's in God's hands.
Right, and that's a good one. And this guy, he's not going to give up, and we've seen him before. We've debated him before. He's not going to give up. So now he's going to go to Colossians, and he's going to say, but he says in chapter 1, verse 6, he says, which has come unto you as it is in all the world, and bringeth forth fruit as it does also in you, etc., etc. He's talking about the gospel being brought into all the world. So he says, well, hey, wait a minute now. If this commission was already preached in the first century, and then the end was supposed to take place, of course, they're giving you the false interpretation of Matthew 24. It says, well, the end's going to come. And then they collate that with, say, Luke chapter 21, where it says, all these things will everything written will be fulfilled. You know the verse I'm talking about. Yeah. So he's building a case now. He's building a case that everything happened in the first century, and you got to go, man. You got a meeting, so you've only got 5 more minutes to refute him. What would your response be?
And I think particularly that the gospel being preached into all the world, because Jesus does say this gospel of the kingdom will be preached into all the world, and then the end will come. So they would have, there's a point to be made there. Then you go to Romans, I think Romans there, and then there's other places it talks about the gospel being preached and the sound went forth into all the world. I think you have to ask yourself a question: is does Christ mean that once the gospel is preached to every physical location on the planet, does that mean that that's the end? I don't think that's the case. I think if you look at what he says there and other places, I think the obvious, well, and I don't want to jump to Romans 11, but I really would love to jump to Romans 11 because I've been doing a lot of thought about that. But I'll pull this out. When Paul talks about, and then shall all Israel be saved. It's not just about every location in the world having somebody preaching. It's about the full number of the elect being brought in. So yes, the gospel was being preached in all the physical locations that they knew about, but that's not what we're talking. We're talking about the gathering of the elect. The gospel will be preached, and then he will send forth his angels to gather his elect. That's what he says next. And so this is about the preaching of the gospel. Thankfully, thank God Almighty that the Israel only people are idiots, and they're not correct. Thank God that he's still gathering the elect in, because that gives me and you hope to be gathered, right? So it's not about every physical location. It's about the people who belong to God being brought in to this thing that God has done. Does that make sense? Did I make sense there?
Yeah, you made
Makes
perfect sense. That's a good answer. And yeah, I think you have a good chance of convincing the person if they were willing to be taught and instructed. A lot of times, though, we run into hyperpreterists and we deal with them routinely, and they're not teachable. They're simply not teachable. You could tell that anything that you say, any evidence that you give them is just going to bounce right off. So I guess, I don't know, Lance, what is your opinion of the whole thing?
Of the whole thing of
just the debate in general between hyperpreterists and full preterists, and the fact that they don't want to listen to us when we give them text. Because William, he gave some great texts, right? And he gave some great arguments.
Yeah.
But we know, all of us here know, that a lot of people are not going to be convinced, not because the arguments aren't good, not because they're not valid, reasonable theological arguments, but simply because they're not in a position to receive truth. So what's your opinion on this? Do you think where do we go from here? I guess was what I'm asking.
I just will try to tell them to try to be honest with themselves, and I'm usually gonna end up, having somebody that's listening to this conversation. So I'm just gonna keep spouting the truth to them, and then I'll probably get messages where it's like, "Hey, man, I really appreciate what you said there about that. I was on the fence, but now, like, that guy that you were talking to, I was on the fence about it, but now I'm not, because you were making so much sense and that guy was not making any sense." So usually that's what seems to happen a lot for me when that case happens. Yeah. So, I mean, if he's unteachable, he's unteachable, but I'll try to still tell everybody else, like, this is why this guy is wrong. And I'm saying it in love. I'm not saying it usually not saying it in hate or anger, unless they're really mean. But which has happened before. William can attest to it. I've got a little temper sometimes. But yeah, that's what my answer would be.
Right. And that's great. And William, so say someone's interested. I don't know anything about the Eastern Orthodox Church. Mm-hmm. So if I were to study any book, say I would buy a book that would let me know all about your faith and practice, what would be the best book I could buy just to tell me about what the Eastern Orthodox Church is, what they believe, and of course, give me some resources in case I'm maybe interested in checking it out for myself?
I can be funny and say the Bible, but I won't do that.
Right.
But I think that's a good question. I think there's plenty of authors that have done really good. I like Father Peter Gilchrist. I'm trying to remember the name of the book he wrote, but Journey to Orthodoxy, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good. Father Peter Gilchrist, Father Metropolitan Callistus Ware's The Orthodox Way has been really instrumental, and both of these guys were converts to Orthodoxy. It's an in-depth subject. I will say this though, my mission is not to convert the world to Eastern Orthodoxy. If you want to become Eastern Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodox, that's between you and God. My mission is to save people's faith, and I don't necessarily think that because you're not Eastern Orthodox, you're lost or away from God.
Same.
But I do believe that there are some things that people can teach. There are some things that people put forth that are not just bad doctrines or doctrines I disagree with, that they are soul destroying doctrines. And so for anybody that would be listening, if you think I'm trying to hard sell, Eastern Orthodoxy, that's not what this is about.
Right.
It's about reaching for, and I would like to comment on, you talked about the people that you can't win. For every person out there that's just will not hear you, there's 10 people reading along. And I get people on a regular basis that contact me or they message. They were either thinking about full preterism and thought it sounded interesting, or they were stuck in it, didn't know how to get out of it. And those are the people we're reaching for. It's kind of like that sign out in front of the big power plant that says "Warning, do not enter." That's kind of what we're doing here. We're trying to warn people this thing is dangerous, and it has the potential to harm you. And we want to warn people before they take that bad turn down that road. And so that's what we're laboring for. I think as far as, coming into Orthodoxy, if you really want to know about Orthodoxy, just go visit an Orthodox parish. I think that's the best thing to do. It's a very experiential practice of the Christian faith. And so that would be my recommendation. Find a local parish and visit and introduce yourself and familiarize yourself a little bit with what's going on there. I hope I made sense. I tend to ramble sometimes.
That's excellent. Well, Lance, do you have any last questions for William or anything that you'd like to add to this discussion? It's been about an hour. I think we can end soon.
I know we always ask this to people that are in this. So what do you think the future of full preterism is, William Vincent?
Full preter, I'm going to say about 3 or 4 years ago now, I told Sam Frost, I said, Sam, the next thing they're going to do is they're going to deny the continued bodily resurrection of Christ. And I said because that's exactly what the Gnostics did in the 2nd century. And it was literally almost like 2 months later that William Bell said, almost verbatim, that God never had a body. God never became human. Okay. And then he tried to retract. So, where is full preterism going now? It will continue to move headlong into New Ageism. It is doing that now. It will continue to move toward the New Age. It will continue to move away from historical Christianity when guys like Don Preston and Gary Demar realize they can no longer sell books to Orthodox, and I'm saying small Orthodox Christians. They will move on and continue to sell books to the New Agers, because I hate to say anybody's motivation, but I feel like the motivation there may be just to sell books. Okay. But once they realize that the average Christian that has the weapons now to answer, they'll move on to the audience of the spiritual but not religious, the esoteric, that's where Max King's son is now, the modern day father of full preterism. That's where that organization's going. That's where it'll continue to go. The danger here, guys, it's not just full preterism. Full preterism is almost like a thermometer for the spiritual climate of the day. There is a movement among Christians to move together, to move toward orthodoxy, to reaffirm what has defined Christianity, and there's a movement to redefine Christianity in a way that looks nothing like Christianity. And I think full preterism will find a home in that second expression. And I think, thankfully, it's being recognized and asked to leave the building on the first instance.
Right. Well, that's excellent. This has been a really great interview. I don't know if this is our best one, but it's got to be like way up there at the top. I do appreciate your insight, William. You're a very knowledgeable man. And thank you, Lance, for asking him to come on the show. We'll wrap it up with that. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you for your thoughts, your comments, your observations and what have you. We'll be back soon, hopefully within the next couple of days with a new interview. Until then, have a great evening, a great weekend, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you for having me, guys.